Well, here we are, the final episode of the Vice City Let's Play. You might be asking yourself, wow, where did the time go? And I'm here to tell you that it went nowhere, and that I took a long break from playing this game because I found it unbelievably depressing to think about, a slog, a bad time, just something I didn't want to do. But I also owed it to you, dear viewer, to get back in here and start going, and the final video of this series is breaking from format a little bit. I guess that's appropriate, because the final portion of Vice City breaks from the format that's been set out since the beginning. To do this, I'm going to have to transform myself. I'm going to have to Jacob Geller the shit out of this thing. Tommy Vercetti came to Vice City to work some deals for the mob, and then that went haywire almost immediately. He found the villain Diaz and unseated him from his cocaine mansion, and then there was half of the game left to play. You see, the final boss of Vice City is not the guy who did you dirty. The final boss, the real hard problem to solve, is how to become a kingpin of the Miami flavor in a fantasy of the 1980s. What happens in that last section of the game is a hard problem of currency and real estate accrual. The mafia guys who sent Tommy down to Vice City are waiting in the wings to be paid off or supported or something, but Tommy actively ignores that for as long as humanly possible so that he can start building a base of capital. In fact, final missions of the game where Tommy's former allies come to collect can't even be triggered until the player purchases at least 6 of a possible 8 businesses that he can grab and support and work in and start wheeling and dealing into profitability. In the 1980s, greed was good. Media circulated around the excesses of Wall Street expenditure, and competing stock market earnings became pop culture phenomena. It's the culture that produced Patrick Bateman's musical opinions a few years later, and it was the seed of our current get-rich-exponentially crypto fantasies of the past couple years. The idea that your fortune could be tied to a speculative economic form that could wax and wane with your risky maneuvers captured the American imagination. The world was in the hands of a bunch of suit-wearing, screaming guys who knew how the numbers worked. Pure chaos. So Vice City is a throwback game, and with the hindsight of 2022, you might assume it might dip into that side of the American project. Despite being a guy who accrues a lot of money and plays around with some real bigwigs, Tommy Vercetti is a remarkably grounded character. While he will absolutely purchase a business and allow it to accrue value over time, letting him skim a little off the top for eternity as is his God-given right as a capitalist, he's also willing and really wants to get his hands dirty. Tommy Vercetti is not content to make his money make more money. For Vercetti, spending tens of thousands of dollars, of 1980s dollars, on cab companies, ice cream factories, and film studios is not just an investment that pays off dividends. It is the decision to purchase new responsibilities. Tommy has to recruit employees and destroy the cars of opposing cab companies. Despite living in a fictional version of the decade when famous right-wing ideologue Margaret Thatcher claimed that society did not exist, Tommy Vercetti is strangely a man, locked into societal connections. He pisses people off, and they come after him. He drives through rival gang territory, and people come to drag him out of his car and kick his ass. In other words, the historical world around Tommy elevated the slow dissolution of societal connections, valorizing acceleration of the accumulating human into trajectories that took them to suburbs, then exurbs, then vacation homes, then ranches, and now, 40 years later, into space itself, where the only people who get to hang out are the capitalist kings and the select few they extend their charity to. Never forget that William Gibson told us about Freeside 3 years before we encountered Gordon Gekko. And in that mix, that speculative space of the rich figure who became so rich that they could eject themselves from the earth itself, Tommy Vercetti sits in his own simulacrum of the finance decade, running around with a baseball bat to buy a boat shipping dock? This isn't the fantasy. This isn't what we think about the 1980s. What's going on here? This might be the only way that it works. The truly rich understand their lives as balance sheets and Excel notes, and very few of us find QuickBooks to have compelling gameplay. On the contrary, it's clear from games like SnowRunner that there's something sticky about the drudgery of work itself. Ian Williams wrote back in 2014 that there was something unalienating about these games, that they fulfilled some missing links in the labor pipeline for those of us who don't ice road truck or hang out in muddy ditches all day. Doing the sloggy work of winching a truck down a terrible road establishes a clear connection between the play-by-play work you have to do and the product of that labor, which got Tchotchke A to location B in a triumphant manner. It's the feeling of Mario sliding down the flagpole if Mario was instead a truck you hated to drive. I don't know if it really makes for unalienated labor. I don't know if that fantasy gets fulfilled for everyone, but it's undeniable that there is something materially fun or interesting about doing the drudgery of work, of doing this kind of walk around, talk about it, hands-on investment strategy that Tommy Vercetti gets up to. With that said, there might be a little bit of re-lensing in order. We might want to look at this from a slightly different angle. So how about this? The act of purchasing properties and managing them in the video game Vice City is what Cyan Nye terms a gimmick in her book, The Theory of the Gimmick. So a side note here before we get started, I think the gimmick as it gets theorized in this book, which you should check out if you want to, has huge implications for how we understand game mechanics, period. Just in a general sense, I don't think that what I'm going to talk about for the rest of this video is unique to Vice City in any way, and one day I'll probably play out that argument in a bigger way in some piece of writing, so stay tuned for that, but I'm going to talk about it in a pretty specific way here. Nye's concept of the gimmick revolves around how we perceive certain aesthetic events or objects or moments. What I associate Nye with most strongly across all of her books is an attentiveness to things that fly under the radar, or which we pass over a little bit too easily in the way that we discuss things in the world. I mean, we're all familiar with the gimmick, right? Conceptually? You know, I feel confident that you, at some point in your life, have seen something and you thought, that's a little bit too much of a gimmick. You know, that's a little goofy. That's a little bit, that's being sold to me in a way that I'm not interested in. Can you tell I'm getting a little bit off script here? Okay, let me get back. Nye balloons that general feeling, pushes it into a full-fledged theory of how we exist within capitalism itself. So what is a gimmick? As Nye puts it, a gimmick is something that we see working too little or working too hard. She aligns it with a contrivance, and Nye suggests the gimmick is something that sticks out like a sore thumb, in that we recognize it and become subtly annoyed by it, due to the effect it has on us. So when you watch someone play that Connect game, Connectimals, and you think, that seems like a lot of work for not a lot of payoff. You're looking at the Connect and you're thinking, hey, that's a little bit of a gimmick. So what if we expand that out to a full theory of aesthetics? That's what Cyan Nye is helping us do. On the most basic level, in the context of Vice City, it's clear that the miniature RC helicopters and planes that you drive in controller-destroying missions are gimmicks. Nye writes that the gimmick thus names an experience of dissatisfaction, mixed for all this with fascination, linked to our perception of an object making untrustworthy claims about the saving of time, the reduction of labor, and the expansion of value. I'm given a mission that has me hooting a little awful vehicle around. It is dissatisfying in precisely the ways that Nye is discussing here, more specifically, the latter category. I'm being given a novel set of mechanics within a special mission type as an expansion of value. When I played the game back on release, I absolutely had the experience of thinking, wow, look at what they managed to cram into this game, even if the mission I was playing was gimmicky and ultimately frustrating to engage with. It's a little bonus. It's a thing that says, hey, you should be happy to be getting this thing, even though you immediately recognize it as something that is extraneous or unrewarding, despite the fact that you're being told that you're being rewarded with it. So the property buying and investment mechanic in Vice City is a gimmick on similar terms, I think, although it's a gimmick that balloons up to take up a significant amount more time and space than any of the others in the game. After all, as I said just a few minutes ago, it does not capture a historical reality or even a fantasy of one. These 1980s are not what the 1980s were like. What we're doing in the last few hours of Vice City is much more about finding an excuse to let us loose on the open world to accrue value in the form of a ticking counter with a money sign attached to it. We wander around, we grab money, and we plug it back into a system until the game finally allows us to stop playing. The gimmicky nature of the property purchasing mechanic is revealed in its dinkiness. Do a few missions and wait long enough for the money to accumulate and you're good to go. The game is not asking us to solve interesting problems or engage with some kind of skill system. Instead, it's just demanding brute force hours of gameplay time. Putting time coins into the slot machine of Vice City eventually produces a payout, and it is neither hard-won nor particularly rewarding when you get it. It is the logical outcome of a time sink. It's a gimmick that makes you feel like you own virtual property that lives inside someone else's universe. It is not lost on me that this is the predominant investment fantasy at the moment that this video releases. It's not surprising that this whole investment scheme feels like a gimmick. Investment strategies themselves, with their attendant fantasy of money breeding money, of money for nothing, is a byproduct of modernism. Nye affirmatively quotes Stanley Cavell in her book when he wrote that, quote, all art becomes intrinsically gimmick-prone after modernism, end quote. It's no shocker that we have an entire art form predicated on gimmicks, of modes of interaction that step in front of us and ask us to work too hard to play with them, or modes of interaction that short-circuit our normal ways of engagement with arbitrary difficulty. After all, that second thing I just said is some scholars' entire definition of what a game is. To perform my own kind of short circuit, knowing the references and the type of game that Vice City is, you're probably unsurprised that this long-form engagement with the property purchasing mechanic and its gimmicky missions of delivering ice cream and driving cabs pays off in a boring betrayal and a defense of Tommy Vercetti's mansion in the center of the city. The 1980s action film has a flow to it, and Tommy's friends were never entirely his friends to begin with. He has to use his power, and his influence, and his accrued guns, and his armor, to destroy anyone who might appear to take his ill-gotten gains from him. Shocker. From 1,000 feet, it is easy to see the entire flow of this thing. The workaday investor getting involved in direct property management combines two very American ideals: working hard for your immense wealth, while never having to work a day in your life. It's the kind of paradox or cognitive dissonant moment that makes up the American working imagination. Like the real 1980s, like the gimmick, there's no big payoff here. Vice City captures a confused America that contains so many contradictions that you can't extract all of the at-odds pieces from the whole. It slaps some credits on a boss battle and leaves you to the open world. Figure out how you feel about it in your own time. There's an infinite amount of opportunity to reconstruct the past to understand what happened. Or maybe it was just a series of speed bumps, each a little different, that culminated in a lot of spent time. If you're like Tommy Vercetti, you might leave the whole affair feeling like you've accomplished something, but also that someone screwed you over a few times along the way. And that's Vice City.
She can do like 0 to 60 in 4 seconds flat, dude.
And she can hold like 20 bales of the best Jamaican smoke right in the hull.
So go ahead, dude. She's ready to fly.
Yo, suit dude. You got a light? Dude.